This presentation will be focusing on the use of altering motivating operations through both satiation and deprivation. There are several different ways motivating operations can be used, which will be touched on later, but the intervention strategies I'll be focusing on primarily throughout will be altering motivating operations as a strategy to decrease problem behavior and increase skill acquisition. First, I want to discuss some assumptions about problem behavior. So problem behavior is assumed to be occurring because there's an EO in effect for it. Therefore, by eliminating the EO by ways such as satiation, you're creating an abolishing operation, which may result in a decrease of problem behavior. A study conducted by O'Reilly et al. In 2008 attempted to decrease problem behavior in 3 individuals with severe disabilities by reducing the evocative effect of the MO for the problem behavior. An easy and unobtrusive strategy to decrease problem behavior is to alter the motivating operation that is in effect. O'Reilly et al. Suggest first to conduct an FA to determine the maintaining consequence, which ideally will be a reinforcer that's socially mediated. Second, pick a measurement system such as momentary time sampling or partial interval recording that is appropriate for the topography of the target behavior, and take data throughout the day to identify the relative rate of behavior and the setting event in which the behavior most often occurs. Once you've identified the maintaining reinforcer and the setting event, the third step is to provide at least 15 minutes of free access to the reinforcer immediately prior to the identified setting event. An important note the authors make is that the pre-session access must result in satiation, thereby functioning as an abolishing operation. Otherwise, if they don't satiate, access may function as a priming session and inadvertently create an establishing operation for behavior. This intervention strategy alters the establishing operation by providing free access to the maintaining reinforcers up until the point of satiation, thereby creating an abolishing operation which can lead to a decrease in problem behavior. You can use the strategy of altering motivating operations to decrease behavior if the behavior interferes with their daily living and if you have the resources to do so. Do not use the strategy alone. Always use it in conjunction with another procedure, such as a DRA, which will establish an appropriate alternative to compete with the problem behavior. 2 studies increased 2 different types of skill acquisition by restricting access and creating an EO, which both altered the value of the reinforcer as well as increased the frequency of behavior maintained by those reinforcers. Taylor et al. Conducted a study in 2005 to evaluate the effects of manipulating the establishing operation of deprivation on skill acquisition in children with autism. First, conduct a preference assessment to identify potentially reinforcing stimuli to be used in the intervention. Taylor et al. Conducted a free operant preference assessment, which occurs in the natural environment and involves allowing the learner to engage in activities freely, and data is taken on the amount of time the learner spends with each item. Operationally define the target response so that everyone involved in the intervention is aware of what is considered an occurrence or non-occurrence, and then take a baseline data to identify where the learner is relative to the steps in the skill acquisition program. Stimuli that were identified in the preference assessment as highly preferred, in this case stimuli the learner engaged with the longest, can be restricted to promote deprivation, thereby creating an EO and increasing the value of that stimuli as a reinforcer. Follow the skill acquisition program as outlined and use the highly preferred yet restricted stimulus as reinforcement. Withholding access deprives the learner of that item or activity, thereby creating an EO by altering the value of that item as a reinforcer. Cengher, Jones, and Fienup conducted a study in 2014 using an intervention strategy similar to the one used by Taylor et al. However, rather than conducting a preference assessment, they conducted an FA to identify the function of tacting colors. The FA in their study determined that higher rates of tacting occurred when attention was provided. Their intervention then involved restricted access to attention prior to every session. Therefore, restricting access to attention created an EO and altered the frequency of tacting behavior. Altering motivating operations can be used to establish a reinforcer as valuable to promote skill acquisition, or it can be used to increase the frequency of behavior a learner already has. Brief access to a reinforcer can also be used to prime a response, which can increase the frequency of a given behavior. Do not use this strategy to withhold essential primary reinforcement. Instead, use the periods of food and water deprivation throughout the day to increase motivation. So for example, run a program reinforced by food before lunch when you know they're hungry, thereby creating an EO for food as reinforcement.